Welcome to the Day Weather Podcast, everyone. It's Thursday, March 4th, 2021. This is what we're going to talk about with this podcast today. We got a small bump in the road weather-wise. That's going to be a small Colorado storm, and storm that will go into Kansas later today and tonight. The storm system is going to produce some rain and snow over parts of Colorado into areas of western Kansas and far eastern Colorado that could really use some moisture, but it's a warm system, so snow levels aren't going to be terribly impressive with this system on the plains. It'll be more wet than white for many areas. Spring-like weather, though, is going to return Friday through Monday and Tuesday of next week. This mild weather will continue. Temperatures 50s and 60s, lots of sun. There may be a little bit of high cloudiness at times. It might get a little breezy at times, but other than this little bump in the road today, the weather Friday through probably Monday, and we might squeeze in Tuesday, the weather looks really good. Now, next week does get more active. It starts late Tuesday through next weekend. We do see us getting out of this nice early March weather and into a more, let's say, March-like pattern by the middle to the end of next week and probably the week after that. We're also going to talk about the blizzard of 49. You're like, why is he bringing up the blizzard of 49? Well, we got a question about it, and we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. First of all, this is where we are today. Here's our little Colorado low. This is where the low is going to be by noontime. You can see it's just going right down I-70. It's going to go like this, then take a little bit of a turn into Oklahoma by tomorrow. It's going to be able to produce moisture in this area right here. You can see the I-80 corridor of Wyoming. It's about as far north as it gets. And you'll see that Utah will have some rain and snow shower activity. Just about all of Colorado picking up some moisture, as well as into areas of western Kansas. There might even be a couple of thunderstorms here in this area later today and this evening. There's a sign of spring coming our way. But you can see the Dakotas, Nebraska, the rest of Wyoming, Montana. Really just not a lot going on with this little system as it heads this way before turning southeast tomorrow. As we look at the snowfall forecast, you can see it's not really impressive. It'll be just cold enough later today and tonight for a changeover to snow on the plains, that Palmer Divide area between Denver and Colorado Springs, and then that divide that goes out along I-70. Well, that will see some snow this evening and tonight, as well as through the mountains, passes of Colorado, and along sections of I-15 in Utah will get a little bit of wet as well. As we get into Friday afternoon, this is tomorrow afternoon, the system is here already. It scoots out. High pressure builds in, a nice ridge of high pressure. So we're going to have nice warmer weather come right back in for Friday and the weekend. This system, while looking well put together, actually is going to hit this ridge, get flattened out, get beat up a little bit, so there won't be much left to it. So there really won't be much weather as it comes through. Here it is. Look at the change that happens from here, the amplitude we call it. See, it's got a nice little dip, but as it hits the high pressure ridge, well, it's much less in the way of amplitude. So it's going to come through producing some high clouds and wind. We'll see a little bit of snow shower activity in the mountains in this area here during the day Saturday, but it's really not going to be much of a system. Now, by Tuesday night into Wednesday, though, this area of low pressure here, this trough in the Gulf of Alaska, makes a move into the Pacific Northwest and California and brings a broad trough of colder weather and moisture into the area. Also, the door opens up to Canada for some colder air to come in behind it. So we're going to take Pacific moisture and Canadian air and put it together. And that's always a way to bring a change, always a way to make it colder, always a way to bring better rain and snow chances into the region. So this nice weather has got some staying power through Monday and most of Tuesday. After that, things get different. By late Thursday into Friday, another trough comes into the region. Now, we did pose some questions a couple of weeks ago, or I think last week, where if anybody had any questions about the weather or what's going on, we did get a question, and we're going to answer other questions that we got in the coming days. But here's one question. Do you have the ability to go back in time and look at the weather data that may have been around the 1949 blizzard, or even data that indicated what the weather was like? Was it an El Nino or a La Nina winter? Well, that's a great question. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about La Nina this year. We just went through that historic Arctic outbreak across many areas of the United States in the month of February. And I think a lot of folks were saying, hey, you know, this sounds like what happened in the 1949 blizzard across the region. Well, first of all, good news. we do have the ability to go back all the way to 1948. We can't go back any further than that in terms of being able to look at what we would call reconstructed weather maps based on the weather information that was available at the time. Thing to remember, in 1949, we had no satellites, we had no computer modeling. We did have weather observations that were taken at airports, but the weather observations were taken hundreds of miles apart. But they have been able to rebuild some things, rebuild what the ocean temperatures would have looked like maybe, as well as what the maps would have looked like if you were to look at a weather map during the blizzard of 1949. Now I'm going to show you what went on during the blizzard of 49. Well, we could do a whole podcast on the blizzard of 49, and I think you'll find it interesting. First of all, the first question, was it an El Nino or a La Nina winter? Well, if you look back at the reconstructions, look at that. Focus on the equator regions. And again, this was before sensors and satellites, but from seafaring that was going on across the oceans at that time, there was a little bit of temperature data gathered up. And from the reconstruction, again, it was a reconstruction, it certainly looked like 1949 in January. This is from January through March in 1949. It was a La Nina. There was a La Nina state in the Pacific Ocean, most likely, based on this reconstruction with the weather. So there you go. Was 1949, the blizzard in 1949, was it impacted like La Nina? The data that looks like it from the reconstruction certainly suggests that indeed that was. To remind you what happens in La Ninas, just like what we happened this year, when the La Ninas are strong, you can have these big displacements from the high latitudes to the low latitudes of Arctic air, just like what we experience. And that's important when we talk about the blizzard of 49. Now here's a reconstructed weather map. Actually, at the time they were building these weather maps, this is for January 1st. The blizzard in 1949 was actually kind of several days put together, but the main event came in on the 2nd and 3rd of January. On the 1st of January, notice there is a cold front being analyzed up here, up in northern part of the United States into western Canada, with an area of high pressure in here behind it. Well, what was up here right here was an Arctic air mass, a deep Arctic air mass, a really, really cold one, even for early January. Now, most of the rest of the western United States was actually pretty mild, had a southwest wind flow into the area, and on January 1st, 1949, well, in the areas that were most impacted by the blizzard of 49 in this area here, it was mild, it was nice, but there was this Arctic front that was just going into Cut Bank, Montana by the 1st. If we were to reanalyze the maps that I show you, we show you those 500 millibar charts with all the colors at 18,000 feet. Well, on January 1st, you can see that the flow is westerly across the United States, which means mild, but here was a big pocket of Arctic air. Watch what happens when we go forward. This is for the 2nd. So as we get into the 2nd and 3rd of January, when the blizzard of 49 hit, we saw a big advancement south of the Arctic air. And notice how it's knifing in here into Idaho and western Montana. Now, if you were to compare that to what happened this past February, the knife of the cold air was more placed east like this. But as we go forward, this is for January 2nd. That Arctic air mass went from here all the way to Colorado Springs by the following day. It brought a rapid change in the temperatures, a huge plunge in temperatures, and also what happened was that if you notice this, it's a little hard to see, but they're analyzing basically a four corners surface low with the Arctic air that's backed up against the front range of the Rockies. So we have Arctic air pouring in, and the counterclockwise spin around the low is bringing moisture up and over the Arctic air, producing heavy snow. Now, we also have a big contrast between it being warmer here and colder up here, so you're going to have a big difference in pressure, and you're going to have some big wind. So let's go forward and show you how the pattern in the upper levels evolved. January 1st, January 2nd, boom, January 3rd, you've got a four corners low, But what is kind of hard to see in this pattern is that, as we showed you on the surface map, we had a big Arctic outbreak right here. That Arctic air was deep, backed up against the mountains, and you're going to get really heavy snow in this situation with that Four Corners low. Then what happened, as we go to the fourth, is that the low got even stronger, and the difference between the air pressures got really more intense, and we had hellacious winds right here. So you had an Arctic blast, you had heavy snow, then you had a prolonged period of high winds. As you go backwards, then forwards, and then by the fifth, we had this very strong low moving northeast into the Dakotas, into parts of Minnesota, the northern plains. That brought even more Arctic air in behind it and even more wind. So if we were to back up and show you the involvement of the weather pattern, that's what happened in the blizzard of 49, and then you got pictures like this. All you got to do is get on a search engine and go blizzard of 49, and you get incredible pictures like this. Life magazine, a cow froze to death standing on up. Certainly the blizzard of 49, there's lots of books, lots of resources about it. There's a lot of information on the socio-economic impacts of the blizzard in 1949. The thing I want to show you here is that when anybody tells you that we've just had an unprecedented weather event and we've never seen anything like this before, well, that's really not the case, because I can go back to the weather charts that we go back into the late 40s and do reconstructions like this and see other episodes where storms like this happen and Arctic outbreaks like this happen. What was really interesting about the blizzard of 49 was it was the perfect confluence of events. We had the perfect storm, so to speak, with an Arctic blast and a deep area of low pressure forming in the low Four Corners region, and then riding along the Arctic boundary was that intense low. And also notice we had a high pressure in the east, high pressure along the west coast. So this whole area of Arctic air and snow and wind was going to move very slowly and take several days to work itself out. The blizzard of 49 will happen again. The difference is that we're in modern times with satellites, computer models, and radar and high-speed communications that they didn't have in 1949. Thanks for watching and listening to the Day Weather Podcast. We'll talk to you